May 1944, southeastern England. A German reconnaissance pilot named Lieutenant Klaus Becker banked his Focke-Wulf 190 over the Kent countryside. His mission was simple: photograph Allied military installations and report troop concentrations. What he saw below made his blood run cold. Tanks, hundreds of them. Sherman tanks arranged in perfect formations across open fields, artillery batteries positioned at regular intervals, troop encampments stretching for miles, landing craft crowding the harbours at Dover and Folkestone. This wasn't just a military build-up, this was an invasion force. Becker's camera clicked rapidly, capturing image after image. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted course. The anti-aircraft fire was surprisingly light. Almost as if the British wanted him to see this. That thought flickered through his mind for a moment, then vanished. He had his orders. Photograph everything. Return to base. Report what he'd seen. Becker pushed his aircraft to maximum speed, racing back across the English Channel. An hour later, he stood in the intelligence briefing room, watching as officers studied his photographs. "Mein Gott," one officer whispered. "They're preparing to invade Calais. Look at the concentration. Look at the position. This is the main assault force." The photographs went immediately to German High Command, to Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, to General Alfred Jodl, eventually to Adolf Hitler himself. Everyone agreed the Allies were coming, and they were coming to Pas-de-Calais, the shortest route across the Channel. What none of them knew was that Lieutenant Becker had just photographed the largest fraud in military history. Every tank was inflatable rubber. Every artillery piece was plywood. Every landing craft was canvas stretched over steel drums. The entire army, 150,000 men strong on paper, didn't exist. It was a phantom, a ghost, a travelling roadshow of deception designed to fool the German army into looking the wrong direction, while 156,000 real Allied soldiers prepared to land at Normandy. Operation Fortitude had worked perfectly, and Becker, along with 100,000 German soldiers, had been completely fooled. Stakes: The Problem with Geography, London. January 1944. Lieutenant Colonel David Strangeways stared at the map on the wall. 2 possible invasion routes across the English Channel. Pas-de-Calais, 21 miles. Normandy, 100 miles. The problem was obvious, so obvious that the Germans saw it too. Calais was the logical choice, the shortest distance, the quickest route to Germany, the most defensible beachhead once established. Every principle of military strategy suggested Calais, and the Germans knew it. Intelligence reports confirmed what Allied planners feared. The Germans had concentrated their strongest forces at Pas-de-Calais. The 15th Army, 19 divisions, over 150,000 men, elite panzer divisions, experienced infantry, the best officers in the Wehrmacht, heavy coastal fortifications, thousands of mines, artillery positions covering every beach. This was the Atlantic Wall at its strongest. The Allies had chosen Normandy for invasion precisely because it was less defended. The beaches were suitable for landing. The defences were lighter, German reserves were positioned elsewhere, but that advantage only existed if the Germans continued to believe Calais was the target. If German High Command realised the truth, that Normandy was the real target, they would shift forces south. The 15th Army would redeploy. Those 19 divisions would move into position, and the Normandy landings would face opposition that could destroy them. General Bernard Montgomery understood the mathematics perfectly. If the Germans bring the 15th Army to Normandy before we establish a beachhead, we lose. Not might lose. We lose. The invasion fails. Thousands die. And we don't get another chance for years. The room fell silent. Everyone present understood what Montgomery wasn't saying. Another failed invasion would give Hitler time. Time to perfect his V weapons, time to develop atomic weapons, time to build his Atlantic Wall into something truly impenetrable. D-Day had to succeed, and success required deception. The Germans had to believe, absolutely, completely, without question, that the invasion was coming to Calais. They had to believe it before D-Day. They had to believe it on D-Day. And, critically, they had to keep believing it after D-Day, even when Allied troops were landing in Normandy. That last requirement was the hardest. How do you convince someone that what they're seeing with their own eyes isn't real? How do you make them doubt the evidence of an actual invasion at Normandy and continue believing in a phantom invasion at Calais? Strangeways knew the answer. You make the phantom more convincing than reality. You give the Germans an army they can see, an army they can photograph, an army commanded by a general they fear, an army so real that when the Normandy landings happen, German commanders conclude that Normandy must be the diversion, because nobody would use their fake army for the real invasion. The real army, the one at Calais, the one commanded by Patton, the one the Germans have been watching for months, that must be the real threat. Strangeways turned to his staff. Gentlemen, we're going to create an army, a complete, functional, believable army of 150,000 men, with tanks, artillery, trucks, landing craft, headquarters, communication networks, supply depots, and airfields. We're going to put this army in southeastern England, directly across from Calais. We're going to make sure the Germans see it, photograph it, and report it. And we're going to do all of this with rubber, plywood, canvas, and radio transmitters, because this army doesn't actually exist. Someone asked the obvious question. How do we hide 150,000 real soldiers? Strangeways smiled. We don't. We use actors. We use artists. We use magicians. And we use the one thing the Germans can't resist, their own logical assumptions. They believe we'll invade at Calais because it's the logical choice. We're going to confirm that belief with evidence. And once someone believes something, they'll interpret every new piece of information as confirmation, even when the truth is staring them in the face. The Phantom Army. Creating the first United States Army group, FUSAG, required solving a dozen interconnected problems. The Army needed a command structure. It needed an insignia. It needed physical presence. It needed communication patterns. It needed a commander the Germans would believe. Most importantly, it needed to be visible to German intelligence without being so obvious that it seemed like a trap. The command structure came first. FUSAG required realistic organizational hierarchy. Allied planners created an elaborate order of battle. 11 divisions, Corps headquarters, Army Group headquarters, support units, engineers, signals, medical, logistics. Each division had specific designation numbers. Each had complete staff rosters, though the names were fictional. Each had equipment lists, training schedules, deployment dates. The organizational detail was extraordinary. If German intelligence captured FUSAG documents and Allied planners made sure they did, every detail would be accurate. Division histories, unit traditions, even fictional commanding officers with complete biographical backgrounds. One memo described the 17th Infantry Division's performance in North Africa, completely fabricated but consistent with actual Allied operations. Another document referenced the 59th Infantry Division's training in Scotland. Total fiction, but perfectly logical given British geography. The paper trail was immaculate. The insignia was crucial. Every military unit needed distinctive shoulder patches and vehicle markings. FUSAG received both. The shoulder patch showed a stylized sword piercing a circle. Simple, bold, easily recognizable. Exactly what you'd expect from an army group. Artists produced thousands of these patches. They were sewn onto uniforms, painted onto vehicles, displayed on headquarters buildings. German reconnaissance would see these markings and log them as confirmation of Fusag's existence. The physical presence was the biggest challenge. How do you create an army visible from the air but invisible up close? The answer: inflatable equipment. British engineers had pioneered inflatable tanks in North Africa. The technology was surprisingly sophisticated. Rubber tubes formed the tank's basic structure. Canvas covered the tubes, stretched tight, to create realistic shape. The canvas was painted in standard camouflage patterns. Details were added: turrets, guns, treads, hatches. From 5,000 feet, the altitude of a reconnaissance aircraft, an inflatable Sherman tank was indistinguishable from a real one. From 50 feet, it was obviously fake. But German reconnaissance pilots wouldn't get within 50 feet. British anti-aircraft defences ensured that. Pilots had to photograph from altitude, where the fakes looked real. Each inflatable Sherman tank weighed 60 pounds. A real Sherman weighed 33 tons. The weight difference was extraordinary: 1,100 pounds versus 66,000 pounds. 4 men could carry an inflatable tank folded in its bag. Moving a real Sherman required a specialized tank transporter. Inflation took 30 seconds with a standard air compressor. Deflation took even less time. Just open the valve. The portability was revolutionary. A single truck could carry a dozen inflatable tanks. That same truck could carry exactly 0 real tanks. This meant Allied forces could deploy phantom armour battalions anywhere, anytime. The engineering behind the inflatable tanks was sophisticated despite the simple concept. British designers had started with basic rubber tubes, the same technology used in life rafts. But early prototypes failed immediately. Wind blew them away. They collapsed under their own weight when only partially inflated. They didn't look realistic from any angle. The breakthrough came when engineers added internal support structures. Metal frames formed the tank's skeleton. Rubber tubes attached to this framework provided the basic volume. Canvas covered everything, stretched tight to eliminate wrinkles that would look wrong from above. The canvas itself was crucial. It had to be waterproof. Tanks sit outside in all weather. It had to be durable enough to survive transport. It had to be paintable with standard military camouflage. And it had to be the right colour when not painted. A neutral tan that matched unpainted American equipment. British manufacturers produced the canvas using rubberized cotton, the same material used for military tents and truck covers. This meant replacement materials were readily available if repairs were needed. The paint job required extraordinary attention to detail. Real Sherman tanks had specific camouflage patterns: olive drab base colour, black and brown disruptive patterns, white stars marking Allied vehicles, specific stenciling, unit numbers, vehicle identification, tactical symbols. All of this had to be replicated on the inflatables. Artists from the camouflage engineer units did this work. Many were recruited from art schools, exactly the training needed for creating convincing fakes. They studied real Sherman tanks extensively. They photographed them from every angle. They measured dimensions. They documented how dirt accumulated on tanks, how paint chipped, how metal weathered. Then they replicated all of this on canvas and rubber. The results were remarkable. One artist, Bill Blass, who would later become a famous fashion designer, specialized in painting realistic tank details: hatches with realistic hinges, treads with proper tooth patterns, exhaust stains showing engine heat patterns, viewports with proper glass reflections, achieved by gluing actual glass pieces to the canvas. From 100 feet away, the tanks looked absolutely real. From 5,000 feet, the altitude of German reconnaissance, they were perfect. But the inflatables had limitations that required careful management. Wind was the greatest enemy. An inflatable Sherman tank, despite weighing 60 pounds, had enormous surface area. Strong gusts could blow them over. Soldiers detailed to tank guard duty had the surreal job of preventing rubber tanks from being scattered across the countryside. One soldier, later interviewed, described watching an inflatable tank tumble across a field during a storm. "It was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever seen," he said. "This deadly weapon bouncing like a beach ball. We spent 20 minutes chasing it down." The solution was anchor stakes. Heavy metal stakes were driven into the ground at multiple points around each tank. Cables connected the stakes to the tank's internal frame. This kept the tanks in position even during harsh weather. But it also created another problem. The cables were visible in aerial photographs. German photo interpreters might notice cables that shouldn't be there. Allied deception specialists solved this by placing the cables strategically. They positioned them where real tanks would have tow cables or fuel lines. From above, the anchor cables looked like normal tank equipment. Punctures were another constant problem. Canvas and rubber, no matter how durable, could be punctured by sharp objects. A piece of shrapnel from a distant explosion, a carelessly handled piece of equipment, even a sharp rock could puncture the tank. Repair crews carried rubber patches and rubber cement. They could patch a punctured tank in about 5 minutes, but they had to notice the puncture first. Partially deflated tanks looked wrong. The shape was off, the proportions incorrect. Guards walked regular patrols inspecting each tank for proper inflation. Any tank showing deflation was immediately patched and re-inflated. The cost difference was staggering. $100 for an inflatable versus $50,000 for a real Sherman. This meant Allied planners could create massive phantom armoured divisions for the cost of a single real tank company. Fusag's tank force included approximately 400 inflatable Shermans. Total cost, $40,000. A real armoured division with 400 tanks would cost $20 million. That's a cost reduction of 99.8% for equipment that looked identical from the air. Allied planners ordered hundreds more inflatables than they initially deployed. This created strategic flexibility. If reconnaissance showed Germans were monitoring a specific area, inflatables could be deployed there within hours. A single truck convoy could deliver enough inflatable equipment to simulate an entire battalion moving into position. Real tank battalions took days to relocate. Phantom tank battalions took hours. This rapid deployment capability became crucial as the deception evolved. The Allies could respond to German intelligence gathering in near real time. If ultra-intercepts revealed German concerns about a specific sector, inflatables would appear there the next day. German reconnaissance would photograph the new threat. Intelligence analysts would update their assessments. And German defences would shift to counter a threat that existed only in rubber and canvas. Artillery was easier to fake than tanks. The engineering was simpler. No treads to simulate. No complex shapes to maintain. Just a gun barrel, carriage and shield. Wooden frames formed the basic structure. 2x4 lumber, cheap, readily available, easy to work with. Carpenters built the frames following measurements of real artillery pieces. 105 mm howitzer, 11 feet long, 6 feet wide, 5 feet high. 155 meters gun, 21 feet long, 8 feet wide, 7 feet high. The proportions had to be exact. German intelligence had detailed knowledge of Allied artillery. A gun that looked slightly wrong in photographs would raise suspicions. Canvas was stretched over the wooden frames. Then came paint. Again, artists replicated every detail. Gun shields showed realistic wear patterns. Barrels had proper taper from breech to muzzle. Carriages showed dirt accumulation in correct patterns, more dirt where wheels kicked up mud, less dirt on upper surfaces. The realism extended to the positioning. Real artillery batteries followed specific geometric layouts, guns positioned at precise intervals, command post centrally located, ammunition storage behind the gun line, forward observer positions in front. Everything matched Army field manuals exactly. German intelligence officers studying the photographs would see batteries positioned exactly as they expected Allied artillery to be positioned. This consistency reinforced the deception's credibility. Engineers took enormous care with supporting details. Artillery creates distinctive signs of use. Spent shell casings. Disturbed earth from recoil. Paths worn by gun crews moving between positions. The deception teams replicated all of this. They scattered empty shell casings around dummy guns. They disturbed the earth in the right patterns. They even created the worn paths. German photo interpreters looking for signs that artillery had been fired would find those signs, not because the guns had actually fired, but because British soldiers had carefully placed the evidence. Landing craft presented unique engineering challenges. These vessels needed to float, or at least appear to float, in harbours where German observation posts could see them. The solution combined multiple technologies. Steel drums, 55-gallon oil drums, provided buoyancy. Each drum could support about 400 pounds. A landing craft needed 40 to 50 drums to achieve realistic flotation. Steel tubes created the basic hull structure. Engineers welded tubes into a skeletal frame matching landing craft dimensions. The drums were lashed to this frame using heavy rope. Then canvas was stretched over the entire assembly. From a distance, the result looked exactly like an LCT, landing craft tank, floating at anchor. The dummy landing craft, codenamed Big Bobs, were manufactured in British shipyards. Ironically, these facilities normally built real warships. Now they were building fake ones. The production process was much faster than building real landing craft. Real LCT construction, 6 to 8 weeks. Big Bob construction, 3-4 days. Approximately 255 Big Bobs were produced for Operation Fortitude. They filled the harbours at Dover, Folkestone, and smaller ports along the Kent coast. German observation posts across the Channel reported this massive invasion fleet. Aerial reconnaissance confirmed the observations. The photographs showed hundreds of landing craft, enough to transport a major invasion force. What the photographs didn't show was how light these craft sat in the water. Real landing craft, even empty, had specific draft. They sat deep in the water. Big Bobs floated much higher because they were essentially empty drums wrapped in canvas. But German photo interpreters didn't notice this detail. They counted the craft, logged their locations, and reported that Allied invasion preparations were nearly complete. The Allies enhanced the deception with careful staging. Some Big Bobs were positioned as if being loaded. Cranes on the docks were positioned over the dummy craft. Real soldiers walked gangplanks onto the Big Bobs, then walked off the other side. From German observation posts, this looked like loading operations. Other Big Bobs were grouped in formations suggesting convoy organization. Real naval vessels mixed with dummy craft. This made the dummy fleet look more authentic. It also made counting difficult. German intelligence tried to determine exact numbers of landing craft, but mixing real and dummy vessels made accurate counts impossible. Was that the same landing craft counted yesterday, or a different one? Had that vessel moved, or was it a new arrival? The confusion was intentional. Allied planners wanted German intelligence to overestimate the invasion fleet's size. Better to have Germans believe the Allies had 500 landing craft when they actually had 250 than have them know the real number. Aircraft presented the final visual element of the deception. Wooden planes were constructed at mock airfields across southeastern England. These were the crudest deceptions. Up close, they were obviously fake, but they didn't need to withstand close inspection. German reconnaissance pilots wouldn't land to examine them. They'd photograph them from 5,000 feet, where wooden plywood silhouettes looked like real fighters and bombers. The construction was remarkably simple. Plywood sheets cut to aircraft profiles. 2x4 lumber frames to support the plywood. Paint to create realistic appearance from above. No interior details. They were essentially billboards shaped like airplanes. Each dummy aircraft cost approximately $50. A real P-47 fighter cost $85,000. That's a cost reduction of 99.94%. Approximately 200 dummy aircraft were produced. They were positioned at mock airfields that were themselves elaborate deceptions. The airfields were real, actual grass fields that could theoretically support aircraft. But the infrastructure was fake. Runways were marked with paint, not poured concrete. Control towers were hollow wooden structures. Maintenance hangars were canvas stretched over frames. But from altitude, everything looked operational. German reconnaissance photographed these airfields repeatedly. Intelligence analysts counted the aircraft. They noted new arrivals, actually just new dummy planes being positioned. They tracked squadron sizes and estimated Allied air strength. All based on plywood and paint. The dummy aircraft were positioned in realistic patterns, parked in revetments, protective earthworks around each plane, arranged in flight line formations, some positioned near maintenance areas, suggesting repairs, others positioned near fuel trucks, suggesting they were being prepared for missions. Every detail reinforced the illusion of an active operational airbase supporting a major invasion force. The sound of war. Visual deception wasn't enough. The Germans had listening posts along the French coast. These posts used sensitive microphones to detect sounds across the English Channel. Tank movements, heavy trucks, artillery being towed, construction activity. All of these sounds carried across water, especially at night. The Allies needed their phantom army to sound real. Enter the 3192nd Signal Service Company. This specialized unit had a unique mission, sonic deception. They'd created something unprecedented in warfare, recorded sound effects of military operations. Engineers from Bell Labs had spent months at Fort Knox recording sounds, tanks starting up, tanks idling, tanks moving in convoy, tank treads on different surfaces, mud, gravel, pavement, infantry units marching, trucks moving in convoy, artillery pieces being positioned, supply operations, crates being loaded, equipment being moved, orders being shouted. All of these sounds were recorded on state-of-the-art wire recorders. Then the recordings were analyzed and refined. Engineers mixed different sounds together to create realistic battlefield audio. A tank battalion preparing to move would include tank engines starting, 20 tanks slightly out of sync, exactly as real tank units operate, officers shouting orders, crews responding, equipment being loaded, tank treads grinding as vehicles moved into convoy formation. The audio had to be perfect, too synchronized, and it would sound fake. Real military operations are messy, chaotic, with overlapping sounds and timing variations. The recordings captured that chaos authentically. The playback equipment was equally sophisticated. Powerful amplifiers were mounted on half-tracks, armoured vehicles with wheels in front and tracks in the rear. Massive speakers broadcast the recorded sounds. The volume was extraordinary. these speakers could be heard 15 miles away. On quiet nights, with the right atmospheric conditions, German listening posts across the Channel could detect the sounds, and what they heard confirmed what their reconnaissance planes photographed: a massive army preparing for invasion. The sonic deception units operated at night. Darkness prevented visual observation of the half-track positions. The Germans heard tanks moving, but couldn't see that the sounds came from speakers. The sonic operators were artists in their own right. They'd perform different scenarios depending on the deception requirements. One night, sounds of tanks arriving, suggesting reinforcements joining the invasion force. Another night, sounds of maintenance work, suggesting the army was preparing equipment for deployment. Another night, sounds of loading operations, suggesting embarkation was imminent. The Germans dutifully recorded all of this audio intelligence. Analysts compared the sounds to known Allied equipment. They identified Sherman tanks, GMC trucks, 105mm artillery. Everything matched expectations. The Phantom Army sounded exactly like a real army. The invisible network, radio deception. But sound wasn't the only thing German intelligence was monitoring. They were listening to radio traffic. Every military unit generates enormous amounts of radio communications, orders flowing down chains of command, reports flowing up, coordination between units at the same level, logistics requests, weather observations, medical evacuation calls, intelligence updates. All of this creates a distinctive pattern, a radio signature that intelligence analysts can track. The Germans were very good at signals intelligence. They had listening posts throughout occupied Europe. Powerful receivers scanned Allied military frequencies constantly. Operators logged every transmission: time, frequency, call signs, transmission length. Direction-finding equipment triangulated transmission sources, revealing unit locations. Most sophisticated of all, the Germans catalogued individual radio operators. Every operator has a unique fist, their personal Morse code style, the rhythm, the spacing, the way they form letters. It's as distinctive as handwriting or a voice. German signals intelligence maintained files on thousands of Allied operators. They knew which operators belonged to which units. If they intercepted a familiar operator transmitting from a new location, they knew that operator's unit had moved. This created both a problem and an opportunity for Operation Fortitude. The problem: FUSAG didn't exist, so it had no real radio operators. The opportunity: if the Allies could fake convincing radio traffic, German intercepts would confirm FUSAG's existence. The 244th Signal Company took on this mission. This unit specialized in spoof radio, faking military communications. 296 men trained for months, learning an extraordinary skill, imitating other operators' Morse code styles. They studied recordings of real Allied operators. They analyzed patterns down to millisecond timing differences. They practiced endlessly, replicating the subtle quirks that made each operator unique. One operator might send dashes slightly longer than standard. Another might have a characteristic pause between words. A third might make the same specific errors repeatedly. The 244th's operators learned to copy all of these individual signatures. The result: when they transmitted as Sergeant Johnson from the 66th Regiment, German intercept operators would recognize Johnson's familiar fist. They'd log the transmission and update their records. Johnson's unit was now in southeastern England. Actually, the real Sergeant Johnson was in southwestern England with the actual invasion force. But the German intelligence file now showed him in Kent, serving with the Phantom FUSAG. Creating Phantom communications required detailed planning. The 244th couldn't just transmit random Morse code. The content had to be realistic, actual military communications about plausible operations. Allied intelligence officers wrote scripts. These scripts followed real military communication protocols exactly: proper call signs, proper authentication codes, proper message formats. Everything had to match established procedures. Sample script: 2nd Armoured Division to 66th Regiment, prepare for inspection, row 900 hours 15 May, all units ready for review, acknowledge. Response: 66th Regiment acknowledges. Will have all battalions assembled as ordered. Simple, routine, utterly mundane. Exactly the kind of communication that happens in real armies every day, and exactly the kind of communication German signals intelligence expected from a real army group. The 244th broadcast these scripted communications on appropriate frequencies. German listening posts intercepted them. Analysts logged them. Files were updated. Fusag's presence was confirmed by independent signals intelligence. The sophistication went deeper. Real armies don't just send occasional messages. They generate continuous radio traffic following daily patterns, morning reports at specific times, command conferences, training exercise coordination, evening status updates, late-night communications about guard duties. The 244th replicated all of this. They created a 24-hour communication cycle matching real army operations. 0600, morning reports from subordinate units. 0730, division staff conference. 1000, training coordination between units. 1200, logistics updates. 1400, intelligence briefings. 1800, evening status reports. 2200, guard mount communications. 0200, late-night security checks. This rhythm continued day after day, week after week. German analysts monitoring these communications saw exactly what they expected: an active, operational army group maintaining normal military routines. The volume of traffic was carefully calculated. Allied signal specialists studied radio traffic from real army groups. They determined average numbers of transmissions per hour, per day, per week. Then they matched Fusag's traffic to those averages. Too little traffic would seem suspicious. Too much might suggest the communications were designed to be intercepted. The right amount, matching real army patterns, seemed authentic. Technical details added another layer of credibility. Different radio equipment has distinctive transmission characteristics: frequency stability, harmonic distortions, carrier wave signatures. German signals intelligence could identify specific radio models from these technical signatures. If they detected SCR 508 characteristics, they knew American armored units used those radios. The 244th used actual Allied military radios. If Fusag's units supposedly had SCR 508 sets, the deception used real SCR 508s. German technical analysis detected authentic American radio equipment. This confirmed that the transmissions were coming from real Allied units, not German deception. Security protocols made the deception more convincing. Real military communications are encrypted. Fusag's communications had to be encrypted too. But here Allied intelligence pulled off something brilliant. They knew from ultra-decrypts which Allied codes the Germans had broken. So Fusag's most sensitive messages were encrypted in those compromised codes. This seems backwards. Why use codes the enemy can read? Because intelligence that's stolen seems more valuable than intelligence that's given. If Fusag broadcast, "We're invading Calais" in clear text, Germans would suspect deception. But if that same information was encrypted in a code they could break, and German codebreakers worked hard to decrypt it, they'd believe it. The information felt earned through German skill and effort. Allied intelligence crafted messages specifically for this purpose. Sensitive discussions about embarkation schedules, ammunition delivery requirements, unit movement orders, all encrypted in codes the Germans could crack. German codebreakers decrypted these messages and delivered them to intelligence analysts as high-value stolen intelligence. Analysts never questioned it. They'd broken the code themselves. The deception even included realistic errors. Real military communications include mistakes, wrong frequencies used accidentally, transmissions garbled by atmospherics, technical equipment failures, operators broadcasting on non-secure channels by accident. The 244th scripted all of these mistakes. An operator would accidentally transmit part of a message on a non-secure frequency. The transmission would cut off abruptly when the mistake was noticed, but not before German monitoring stations intercepted it. These accidental intercepts seemed like intelligence windfalls. Information the enemy didn't mean to reveal was considered the most reliable intelligence. One carefully planned accident in late May involved an operator discussing ammunition deliveries. He mentioned specific quantities, specific units, specific delivery dates. The transmission cut off mid-sentence. German intelligence intercepted this fragment and analyzed it thoroughly. The ammunition quantities suggested major offensive operations. The units matched Fusag's known composition. The timing suggested early July, consistent with other intelligence about Calais invasion planning. Because this seemed like an accidental intercept, analysts trusted it completely. They never suspected the entire transmission was scripted theatre. The Ghost Army in France. While Fortitude focused on strategic deception before D-Day, the Allies needed tactical deception after the invasion. Enter the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, the Ghost Army, 1,100 men recruited from art schools, advertising agencies, and the entertainment industry. Their mission: create battlefield deceptions that would confuse German intelligence about Allied troop movements. These men took the techniques developed for Fortitude and made them mobile. The Ghost Army could simulate 2 entire divisions, approximately 30,000 men. They carried inflatable tanks, trucks, artillery, and jeeps. They had sonic equipment to broadcast battlefield sounds. They had radio operators who could fake entire division-level communication networks. And they had actors, soldiers who would impersonate officers from real units, making public appearances to reinforce the deception. The Ghost Army landed in Normandy 2 weeks after D-Day. Their first mission: simulate a Mulberry harbour at night with lights. The goal was to draw German artillery fire away from the real harbours. It worked. German guns pounded the fake harbour while the real ones continued operating. Then the Ghost Army moved to Brest. Here they faced their biggest challenge yet: helping tie up German defenders by simulating a much larger Allied force than actually existed. The operation was called Operation Brest. It was the first time the Ghost Army used visual, sonic, and radio deception together, and it was one of the rare times they found themselves in actual combat. The Ghost Army set up inflatable tanks in positions visible to German observers. Sonic trucks played sounds of armoured units moving into position. Radio operators transmitted fake messages between phantom tank battalions and artillery units. Meanwhile, real tank companies from the 709th Tank Battalion moved to different positions under cover of darkness. The Germans observed tanks where the Ghost Army wanted them seen. The Germans never saw the real tanks moving into assault positions. When the attack came, German defences were oriented wrong. They'd positioned based on the Ghost Army's deception, not the real Allied locations. But Operation Brest also revealed the risks. Ghost Army soldiers operated dangerously close to enemy lines. If the Germans discovered the deception, if they captured inflatable tanks or sonic equipment, they might realize what the Allies were doing. Worse, If the Germans realized the tanks facing them were rubber, they might attack. The Ghost Army was armed only with 50 caliber machine guns. They couldn't withstand a real assault. Corporal Jack Maisie from Brooklyn later recalled, "Brest was the biggest piece of action I ever saw in World War II. We were vulnerable. We were pretending to be a tank battalion, but if they'd attacked our position, we'd have been slaughtered." The Germans didn't attack. They believed the deception. The Ghost Army moved on to their next operation. Over the next 11 months, they would conduct 21 more large-scale battlefield deceptions. Each one brought them closer to German lines. Each one risked discovery. Each one saved Allied lives by misdirecting German defences. Their finest operation came in March 1945, Operation Viersen. The Ninth Army needed to cross the Rhine River. German defences were strong. The Rhine was a natural fortress. Any crossing would face devastating fire from defenders who could see the entire river. The Ghost Army's job: convince the Germans the crossing would happen 10 miles south of the actual location. They deployed over 600 dummy vehicles, hundreds of inflatable tanks arranged in attack formations, inflatable trucks suggesting massive supply build-up, inflatable artillery positioned to support river crossing. Sonic trucks played sounds of engineer units building pontoon bridges. Radio operators transmitted messages about bridge construction, equipment requirements, crossing schedules. The deception ran for multiple nights. German defenders watched and listened. They repositioned forces to defend against the phantom crossing. When the Ninth Army actually crossed the Rhine, German forces were looking 10 miles in the wrong direction. The real crossing met light resistance. American casualties were minimal. The Ghost Army had pulled off the perfect deception. Patton's performance. But the most important deception wasn't inflatable tanks or sonic equipment. It was a man, General George S. Patton, Jr. Brilliant, aggressive, controversial. The Germans feared him more than any other Allied general. After the slapping incident in Sicily, where Patton struck soldiers suffering from combat fatigue, he'd been relieved of command. This was actually perfect for the deception. Patton was available, and the Germans couldn't understand why the Allies would sideline their best general, unless they were saving him for something important, something bigger than Sicily. Something like the invasion of Europe. Allied planners made Patton the commander of FUSAG. The Phantom Army now had a very real commander. Patton threw himself into the role with characteristic energy. He made public appearances throughout southeastern England, speeches at women's clubs, inspections of troops, actually Ghost Army soldiers in temporary formations, photographs with local dignitaries. Everything was designed to be observed. Patton knew German intelligence had agents in Britain. He knew they were watching him. So he gave them a show. One day he met Brigadier General James Gavin in a London hotel lobby. They chatted briefly. As Patton walked away, he turned back and shouted, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "See you in the Pas-de-Calais, Gavin." German agents reported the comment. It went into intelligence files as confirmation of the Calais invasion. Patton visited Dover repeatedly. He was photographed inspecting dummy landing craft. He was seen conferring with naval officers about embarkation schedules. He attended briefings at FUSAG headquarters, a real building staffed with real officers who spent their days generating fake paperwork. Every movement was logged by German intelligence. Every photograph was analysed. Every intercepted communication was filed and cross-referenced, and all of it confirmed the same story. Patton was preparing to lead a massive invasion force across the Channel to Pas-de-Calais. The brilliance of using Patton was psychological. The Germans respected him as a commander. They believed he was the Allies' best general. Therefore, Logic dictated that Patton would command the main invasion, not a diversion, not a secondary operation, the main invasion. When D-Day came and Patton wasn't involved, German commanders concluded that Normandy must be the diversion. The real invasion, Patton's invasion, must still be coming, at Calais, where Fusag was positioned, where all the intelligence suggested the main assault would occur. This belief persisted for 7 weeks. 7 weeks during which 150,000 German soldiers of the 15th Army sat in the Pas-de-Calais region, waiting for an invasion that would never come, waiting for Patton. While in Normandy, Allied forces fought desperately to establish and expand their beachhead against lighter opposition than they would have faced if those 150,000 Germans had been there. The double cross, visual deception and sonic trickery weren't enough by themselves. The Germans needed confirmation from sources they trusted, human sources. Allied intelligence provided that confirmation through one of the war's most audacious operations, the double cross system. German intelligence, the Abwehr, had sent numerous spies to Britain. MI5, British counterintelligence, caught them all. Every single German spy sent to Britain during the war was either executed or turned. Turned meant they now worked for the British, while the Germans believed they were still loyal German agents. These double agents sent radio messages to Germany. The Germans believed they were receiving intelligence from loyal operatives. Actually, they were receiving carefully crafted disinformation from MI5. The most successful double agent was Juan Pujol Garcia, codename Garbo. Garcia was Spanish, recruited by German intelligence to spy on Britain, but Garcia actually worked for the British. He was so convincing that the Germans gave him an Iron Cross for his intelligence work. They had no idea he was feeding them fabrications. Garcia created an entire network of fictional sub-agents, 27 imaginary people, each with complete backstories. Some supposedly worked in military facilities, others in shipping companies, others in government offices. All of them reported to Garcia, and all of their intelligence confirmed Operation Fortitude's deceptions. One agent supposedly worked near Dover. He reported seeing massive concentrations of tanks and landing craft. Another agent supposedly worked in a War Office department. He reported seeing plans for an assault on Calais. Another agent supposedly overheard Patton discussing embarkation schedules. All of this intelligence flowed to German High Command. All of it was fabricated. All of it was believed. The brilliance of Garcia's deception was its detail. His reports included specifics, unit numbers, equipment types, movement dates. The details were consistent with what German reconnaissance was observing. When a German reconnaissance plane photographed tanks at a certain location, Garcia's agent would report seeing those same tanks. The independent confirmation made both sources more credible. The Germans never suspected they were observing the same deception from 2 different angles. Garcia's most important message came after D-Day. On June 9th, he sent an urgent message to his German handlers. The message, "Normandy is a diversion. The real invasion, the one commanded by Patton, the one involving Fusag, is still coming to Calais. Don't move the 15th Army to Normandy. Keep them in position. The main assault is imminent." German High Command received this message at 3 a.m. They immediately forwarded it to Hitler. Hitler read it and agreed completely. He ordered the 15th Army to remain in position at Calais. When field commanders requested permission to move those divisions to Normandy, where desperate fighting was occurring, Hitler refused. The phantom threat at Calais, the threat that existed only in Allied imagination, in rubber tanks, in radio signals, in Garcia's invented intelligence, kept 150,000 real German soldiers out of the real battle for 7 weeks. The double-cross system's effectiveness was verified through Ultra. British code breakers at Bletchley Park had cracked the German Enigma cipher. They could read German military communications. So Allied intelligence could send deception through double agents, then read German responses to verify the deception was believed. It was a closed loop of deception and verification. On June 1, 1944, Ultra intercepted a message from the Japanese ambassador to Germany, Hiroshi Oshima. Oshima had met with Hitler to discuss the anticipated Allied invasion. The decrypted message revealed Hitler's thinking. He expected the main invasion across the Strait of Dover. He believed Norway might also be attacked. He thought southern France was possible. He considered Normandy unlikely. Allied planners read this message and knew their deception was working perfectly. Hitler believed exactly what they wanted him to believe. Resolution: the mathematics of deception. Operation Fortitude ended officially on September 28, 1944. By then, Allied forces had broken out of Normandy. Paris was liberated. The German army in France was in retreat. The Phantom Army at Calais was no longer needed, but its impact was incalculable. Military historians have spent decades trying to quantify Fortitude's contribution to Allied victory. The numbers are staggering. The 15th Army, 19 divisions, approximately 150,000 men. These forces remained in Pas-de-Calais for 7 weeks after D-Day. If they had moved to Normandy in June 1944, they would have arrived while Allied forces were still establishing their beachhead. The Normandy landing forces numbered approximately 156,000 tons on D-Day. Adding 150,000 German defenders would have created numerical near parity, and the defenders had prepared positions, artillery support, and local knowledge. Military analysts estimate that if the 15th Army had reinforced Normandy in June, Allied casualties would have doubled or tripled. D-Day might have failed entirely. At minimum, the breakout from Normandy would have been delayed by months. Those months would have given Germany time to deploy new weapons: V-2 rockets, jet aircraft, advanced submarines, potentially atomic weapons. German nuclear research was further along than the Allies knew in 1944. The cost of Operation Fortitude was trivial compared to these stakes. Inflatable tanks, $100 each, approximately 400 produced $40,000. Dummy landing craft, approximately 255 produced at roughly $500 each, man 120,700. Wooden aircraft, approximately 200 produced at minimal cost. Sonic equipment. Bell Labs development costs plus production of playback equipment. Ghost Army operations, 100 soldiers' salaries and equipment. Double cross system, MI5 operational costs. Total estimated cost, less than $2 million. Compare this to the cost of a single B-17 bomber, $240,000, or the cost of D-Day itself, billions of dollars. Operation Fortitude may have been the highest return on investment operation of World War II. $2 million in fake equipment and deception operations kept 150,000 enemy soldiers out of the decisive battle of the war. The human cost tells an even more compelling story. D-Day Allied casualties, approximately 10,000 killed, wounded, missing. If the 15th Army had been present, estimated 20,000 to 30,000 casualties. Operation Fortitude saved between 10,000 and 20,000 Allied lives on D-Day alone. The subsequent Normandy campaign would have been even bloodier if those German divisions had been present. The Ghost Army continued operations after D-Day, conducting 21 more deceptions. Their estimated impact, 15,000 to 30,000 Allied lives saved through tactical deceptions that misdirected German defences. 3 Ghost Army soldiers were killed in action. Dozens more were wounded. The mathematics were brutal but clear. Spending a few soldiers' lives on deception saved tens of thousands in direct combat. The techniques pioneered in Fortitude and refined by the Ghost Army became permanent parts of military doctrine. Modern armies study Operation Fortitude at staff colleges worldwide. The principles remain valid. Convince the enemy to defend the wrong place, and you win before fighting begins. Psychological operations units in modern militaries trace their lineage to the Ghost Army. Information warfare specialists study the double-cross system. Everything from cyber deception to electronic warfare draws on lessons learned in 1944. The inflatable tanks themselves became legendary. After the war, remaining Ghost Army equipment was used in training exercises. Real soldiers trained against enemy forces represented by inflatable equipment. The irony, American soldiers training to fight phantom enemies, just as German soldiers had deployed to fight phantom armies. None of the original Fortitude inflatable tanks survived. They were too fragile, too valuable for their materials during post-war shortages. But examples of later inflatable military equipment exist in museums. The Imperial War Museum has an inflatable tank. The National WWD Museum in New Orleans features Ghost Army equipment. These artifacts represent more than clever engineering. They represent the power of imagination in warfare. The Ghost Army received recognition decades late. Their operations remained classified until 1996. For 50 years, these soldiers couldn't tell their families what they'd done during the war. They'd saved thousands of lives through deception, but that heroism was classified. In 2022, the Ghost Army finally received the Congressional Gold Medal. 3 survivors attended the ceremony: Bernard Bluestein, 100 years old, Seymour Nussenbaum, 100 years old, John Chrisman, 99 years old. These men had carried inflatable tanks across French countryside. They'd broadcast fake radio messages while enemy forces listened. They'd created battlefield illusions that convinced German commanders to make fatal mistakes. And for decades, nobody knew. Bluestein summed up the Ghost Army's philosophy. It was like putting on a big production. We were actors. The Germans were our audience, and the show we put on saved lives. Operation Fortitude proved something profound about warfare. The most powerful weapon isn't always the largest gun or the biggest bomb. Sometimes it's imagination. The ability to make the enemy see what isn't there, the ability to make them believe what isn't true, the ability to convince them to deploy 150,000 soldiers to defend against an army of rubber and canvas. Lieutenant Klaus Becker never knew he'd been fooled. His reconnaissance photographs were accurate. He photographed exactly what he saw. His report was truthful. He described what he observed. His analysis was logical. He concluded that a massive invasion force was preparing to attack Calais. Everything he did was correct according to his training and experience, and everything he concluded was exactly what the Allies wanted him to think. That's the essence of perfect deception. Not just fooling the enemy, but making them fool themselves. Making them reach the wrong conclusion through impeccable logic based on carefully fabricated evidence. Operation Fortitude fooled 100,000 German soldiers, but more importantly, it fooled their commanders, it fooled their intelligence analysts, it fooled their strategic planners, and it fooled Adolf Hitler himself, all with rubber tanks that 4 men could carry, all with canvas landing craft that cost $500, all with recordings of tank engines played through speakers, all with double agents who didn't exist. The Germans never expected the invasion's greatest weapon to be imagination. That failure of imagination cost them the war.